casa siempre y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo del público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral. Que el cierre de brechas, que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces, nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, The Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement quédate en casa, que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Bermuda, Argentina, the Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominica, Ecuador, El Salvador, the United States of America, Grenada, Guatemala, Guyana, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, la República Dominicana, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, Uruguay, Venezuela. Madam Chair, this meeting has quorum. Thank you.
Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. I have the honor to declare open the special meeting of the Permanent Council pursuant to Article 14 of the Statutes of the Permanent Council and Article 37 of its Rules of Procedure. The meeting was convened at the request of the permanent missions of Antigua and Barbuda, Brazil, Canada, Grenada, and the United States, as contained in document CP/INF 9367/22, with a view to considering the seizure of OAS officers in Nicaragua. In accordance with Article 43 of the Rules of Procedure of the Permanent Council, we will proceed to adopt the order of business for this meeting as contained in document CP/OD-2363/22. There being no observations, the order of business is hereby approved. We shall proceed now to the second item on the order of business and consider the draft resolution, the seizure of OAS officers in Nicaragua, as contained in document CP/Doc 5780/22, and presented by the permanent missions of Antigua and Barbuda, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Grenada, the United States, and Uruguay. I offer the floor first to the proposing permanent missions for the presentation of the draft resolution. Saron, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I proceed with a formal statement introducing this resolution, I would like to point out two amendments in the resolution which was circulated just before the start of this meeting. First of all, the preambular paragraphs are misnumbered at the end. On page 2, it should be PP6, PP7, PP8, and PP9. Right now it says 2 PP6s, and 2 PP7s. So it should be PP6 beginning with the word conscious, PP6 beginning with the word expressing, PP7 beginning with the word affirming, and PP8 beginning with the word emphasizing. And that would be the correct numbering. One further correction, if I may, on the what is now PP7, as I've just described it, and was the second PP6 on what was circulated. There's a slight amendment to the words "is happening." Those two words will be deleted and will be replaced by "has happened." I repeat that. The deletion of the words "is happening" and the replacement of those two words with the words "has happened." I hope, Madam Chair, that all the delegations were able to understand and fully what I've just described. I'll proceed now, Madam Chair, to make a formal presentation. Madam Chair, the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda, on its own behalf, and on behalf of the delegations of Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Grenada, the United States, and Uruguay, presents this draft resolution entitled "The Seizure of the OAS Offices in Nicaragua" for adoption by this Permanent Council. Madam Chair, a very serious blow was delivered to diplomacy and international relations on Sunday, 24th April, when the government of Nicaragua sent police to enter the diplomatic premises of the Organization of American States and did so forcibly and confiscated the organization's documents and other property. The act strikes at the heart of a long-established norm of relations between states and intergovernmental institutions. For small countries such as mine, Madam Chair, if this disregard for long-accepted diplomatic practice, accepted both by the United Nations and this OAS, if this goes unchecked, there would be undesirable and serious consequences. We depend on every nation's respect for the legal international order for safeguarding our own missions and the missions of organizations to which we belong. As has been stated in this resolution that is before us, this norm of diplomatic practice was entrenched in an agreement on privileges and immunities of the Organization of American States that was adopted on May 15, 1949, to which Nicaragua acceded on October the 31st, 1960. Chapter 1, Articles 2, 3, and 4 specifically provide that the premises of the organization, its archives, and all documents belonging to it shall be inviolable, and that its property and assets shall be immune from search, requisition, confiscation, expropriation, and any other form of interference, whether by executive, administrative, judicial, or legislative action. Further, as the resolution also states, on October 2nd, 1989, the government of Nicaragua signed an agreement with this Organization of American States, under which the Nicaraguan government accorded full privileges and immunities to the diplomatic premises of the organization in Nicaragua, including its inviolability. There can be no question, Madam Chair, that these agreements with this organization have been grievously violated, obliging this Permanent Council not only to condemn the actions by the Nicaraguan government, but also to insist that the immunity of the archives and documents of the OAS remain immune. Madam Chair, what makes the action of the Nicaraguan government of all of its member states? Therefore, its diplomatic premises belong to all the member states. This fact could not be the government of Nicaragua, when its police force illegally entered the premises, occupied it, and seized the property within it. Nothing can justify the violation of an international norm that has long been accepted and respected by every government in the world. If the Nicaraguan government's action is seen to be acceptable by the absence of a strong expression and display of disapproval by the OAS member states, it may encourage other similar instances. This is why we draw attention in this resolution to a UN resolution of November 2020, which emphasizes, quote, the duty of states to take all appropriate measures as required by international law for the protection of diplomatic and consular missions and representatives, as well as missions and representatives of international intergovernmental organizations and officials of such organizations, including measures of a preventative nature, and to bring offenders to justice. Madam Chair, I stress that this paragraph is an accurate reflection of a United Nations resolution of November 2020. Madam Chair, the world would be brought closer to the precipice of disregard for the norms and practices that have safeguarded peace and development for over 7 decades, not only in our hemisphere, but in the world. No nation should allow this to happen. This behavior must be condemned and deplored, or lawlessness will prevail and chaos will follow. That's why the Nicaraguan government's violation of a fundamental norm of customary international law and its absolute disregard for specific agreements with this organization must matter to us all and must not be allowed to stand. None of us can allow such behavior to pass without a strong response. Through the adoption of this resolution, the Permanent Council will send a strong message, not only to the government of Nicaragua and to any other government that has behaved similarly in the past, but also to any government that might now contemplate in the future that this egregious behavior will be tolerated. Madam Chair, we urge the adoption of this resolution by consensus, and I would so move after my colleague, the Ambassador of Canada, is given the opportunity to second the motion. Thank you.
Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Sir Ronald. Canada wishes to second the motion of the distinguished representative of Antigua and Barbuda that this resolution be adopted by consensus. Thank you.
El Salvador.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. As I told you this morning during our conversation, El Salvador is not ready to adopt this by consensus. Thereby, we would request that we proceed in keeping with our request made. Thank you.
Considering the new intervention by El Salvador, we will put the resolution to a vote. The voting process will begin with Peru. Do you approve the draft resolution under consideration? We begin the voting process.
Delegation of Peru, may we have your vote, please?
Peru votes in favor.
La República Dominicana,
República Dominicana vota a favor.
thank you.
Dominican Republic votes in favor.
Delegation of St. Kitts and Nevis, please.
St. Kitts and Nevis votes in favor.
Thank you, St. Kitts and Nevis. May we have St. Vincent and the Grenadines, please?
Vincent and the Grenadines abstain.
Oh, sorry.
St. Vincent and the Grenadines abstains.
Thank you, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Delegation of St. Lucia, please.
St. Lucia votes in favor.
Thank you, St. Lucia. The delegation of Suriname, please. The delegation of Suriname, please.
Ms. Gertrude, could you please request the floor? If you are having problem to request the floor, could you please refresh your browser? She's not requesting the floor.
Madam Chair, with your concurrence and that of the Permanent Council, we may proceed to the next country and then come back to Suriname since they're having technical problems.
No, who's requesting?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Suriname is in favor of this resolution.
Thank you, Suriname. The delegation of Trinidad and Tobago, please.
In favor.
Thank you, Trinidad and Tobago. The delegation of Uruguay, please.
In favor.
The delegation of Venezuela, please.
Venezuela votes in favor.
Antigua and Barbuda.
Antigua and Barbuda votes in favor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Delegation of Argentina, please.
A favor.
In favor.
Favor of the resolution as amended by the distinguished delegation of Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you, Ambassador. The delegation of Belize, please.
Belize votes in favor.
I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. The delegation of Barbados, please.
Barbados votes in favor. Resolution as amended also.
The delegation of Bolivia.
No, I don't see Bolivia connected.
Bolivia is not connected and is not in the room, therefore absent. The delegation of Brazil, please.
Brazil votes in favor.
Canada votes in favor.
The delegation of Chile.
Chile.
Chile votes in favor.
Yeah, please.
Colombia votes in favor. Costa Rica votes in favor.
Dominica, please.
The delegation of the Commonwealth of Dominica votes in favor.
Thank you. Ecuador, please.
The delegation of Ecuador votes in favor.
Bien.
El Salvador abstains, Chair.
United States votes in favor.
Delegation of Grenada, please.
Chair, the delegation of Grenada votes in favor.
The delegation of Guatemala.
Guatemala votes in favor.
Guyana votes in favor.
The delegation of Haiti, please.
Haiti votes in favor. Honduras abstains.
Jamaica, please. The delegation of Jamaica, please.
Ms. Williams, could you please turn on your camera, your microphone? Jamaica, could you please turn on your camera and your microphone? In the center bottom of the screen. Jamaica, we can hear you.
Good afternoon. Jamaica votes in favor.
Thank you, Jamaica. Delegation of Mexico, please.
Mexico votes in favor.
Nicaragua is absent. The delegation of Panama, please.
Panama votes in favor.
Delegation of Paraguay, please.
Paraguay votes in favor.
Madam Chair, may I present the results of the vote?
Yes, you may.
29 delegations in favor of the resolution, 0 delegations no, 3 delegations with abstention, and 1 absent. Sorry, 2 absent. I beg your pardon, 2 absent. I repeat, 29 delegations yes, 0 no, 3 abstentions, and 2 absences. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I see El Salvador is requesting the floor. El Salvador, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Mi gobierno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My government would never accept a flagrant violation of international law, especially with respect to the inviolability of diplomatic premises. We call upon nations to comply with international law and in compliance with all international norms means that we all, without exception, must respect and interpret international law without bias. We have abstained from supporting this resolution because in the recent history of this organization, we have seen violations of international norms with respect to diplomatic premises. And so we did not see, however, the OAS protest at that time. We must have no double standard. We must not have ambiguity. We must always know what the situation is. Thank you.
On the Grenadines, you may have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, the Permanent Mission of St. Vincent and the Grenadines notes the subject of this special meeting and the resolution, the seizure of the OAS National Office in Nicaragua. We note equally the reports of the events of April 24, 2022 regarding the OAS National Office in Nicaragua and call for the independent verification of the facts relating to those events. In so doing, however, we remain ever mindful of and reaffirm the fact that the purposes and principles of international law are binding. In addition, we evoke the obligation of all states to abide by the provisions of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, especially its Articles 22 and 24, which are applicable. In this case, governing the conduct of diplomatic relations to provide protection, security, and immunity. The permanent mission of St. Vincent and the Grenadines enjoins the parties involved to create the enabling environment for the re-establishment of dialogue in the promotion of diplomacy, multilateralism, and good relations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Delegations, the Chair now acknowledges the results of the vote as presented by the Secretariat. 29 in favor, 0 against, 3 abstentions, and 2 absences. In that regard, the draft resolution, the seizure of the OAS offices in Nicaragua, as presented by the permanent missions of Antigua and Barbuda, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Grenada, the United States, and Uruguay, as contained in the document CP/Doc 5780/22, is approved. The United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The United States strongly supports this resolution and believes its adoption condemning the attack on OAS offices in Managua is vital for the OAS as an institution. As the United States has stated before, the Ortega regime's forcible occupation of a diplomatic facility illustrates once again its utter contempt for the peaceful, rules-based order in the Americas and for this council. The regime's decision to send police armed with machine guns to shut down the small office representing this organization in Managua violates basic norms concerning the inviolability of the facilities of international organizations. This resolution makes clear that OAS member states will not tolerate such action. We condemn this action in the strongest possible terms and see it in the broader context of the regime's now clear and long-standing rejection of the commitments our governments made to democracy and the rule of law. The Ortega regime has chosen to ignore the recommendations of this council, defy its international commitments, and most importantly, to deny fundamental human rights to the Nicaraguan people. While the Nicaraguan regime has ostensibly left the OAS, it still remains subject to its international obligations. And OAS member states today have demanded the regime take action to urge its compliance with international law. Madam Chair, the OAS remains the most important multilateral organization in the Western Hemisphere and has a long, proud history of supporting the democratic advancement of all nations in the Americas. The United States is proud that OAS member states stood up today to preserve that legacy and to defend the organization when it comes under this kind of attack. Nonetheless, we are obligated to remain engaged on the situation in Nicaragua, to stand up for the rights of the long-suffering Nicaraguan people, and to take whatever future appropriate actions we deem necessary to bring democracy back to Nicaragua. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United States. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And let me start by thanking all of the delegations that voted in favor of this important resolution today. Canada is proud to stand with all of you in condemning the occupation and seizure of the inviolable diplomatic premises of the OAS in Managua by police. Your support sends a strong message to the Ortega regime that they, and only they, are responsible for this flagrant violation of international law. This is a critically important message and one that needs to be heard. As justified as this resolution may be, we should all lament that it was needed at all. But the undeniable fact is that the Ortega regime's behavior grows more deplorable by the day. And recall, by rigging the November 2021 presidential elections, by jailing opposition leaders in order to prevent any form of challenge to Ortega's hold on power, by letting political prisoners languish in prison where they continue to languish to this day and subjecting them to trumped-up trials, the regime is making clear its contempt for the norms and the values that form the foundation of this organization. The rule of law, democracy, respect for human rights and human dignity, and respect for international obligations. I'll continue with in French, Madam President.
These principles are essential to the region, and the member states of the OAS must offer a common front when they are violated. Canada invites the members of this Permanent Council to continue following events closely and be very, very much aware of the political crises and human rights in Nicaragua. We must use all of the tools at our disposal and respond appropriately when the Ortega regime acts in a way that really demands a response on the part of the OAS. We must remain engaged in Nicaragua, and the Ortega regime must be held accountable for its actions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Presidenta, lo ocurrido el pasado 24 de abril es...
What occurred, Chair, last April 24th is extremely grave, a very flagrant violation of international law. We know that the offices of the OAS in Managua were trampled by the Ortega regime, and they made off with 2 archives. This is why we wish to co-sponsor the text that we looked at today. We cannot take half measures when such actions are taken. Now, when on the 27th of April last we considered the situation, we stated, and we state here again, that those most affected by these actions are the Nicaraguan citizens themselves who are being denied their basic freedoms. Exile, very, very difficult political imprisoning for those who dare go against this, and ongoing vexation of the civilian population are the results of any kind of objection, whatever. One must find a political situation, a solution for Nicaragua, and that has to be found by the Nicaraguan people themselves with the support of the international community. And I can only say, and will say again, that we must stand together to gird further respect for human rights in Nicaragua. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. The delegation I represent is very pleased to be able to have voted on this subject. The government of the Republic of Paraguay has indeed several times expressed its grave concern over the direction of the regime in Nicaragua, and we have repeatedly called for a reinstatement of political freedoms and human rights in Nicaragua. We deeply, deeply lament the fact that the government of Nicaragua has, in fact, renounced any belief in the Charter of the American States, and we see what this means in terms of the respect for human rights and the rule of law. Now, the illegal incursion into the OAS offices and seizing of the archives is yet another trampling on the part of the Nicaraguan government of the very principles on which international law is founded. This is why Paraguay has added its voice to the very resolute condemnation of this intolerable action on the part of Nicaragua, which is such a clear violation of its rights. And we demand that the Nicaraguan government immediately return to the OAS all of the files that belong to us, and we are resolutely in favor of any steps that the OAS may take in order to buttress actions to return the Nicaraguan citizens to a rule of law. We can only hope that the Nicaraguan public will remain steadily in favor of these until such time as this occurs. Thank you.
My delegation takes the floor to provide some brief comments on this resolution just adopted by the Permanent Council. St. Lucia voted in favor of this resolution tabled by the delegations of Antigua and Barbuda, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Grenada, the United States, and Uruguay, entitled "The Seizure of OAS Offices in Nicaragua as its aims are legitimate." While Nicaragua has the right to secede from the OAS, as all do member states, it is, however, still obliged to follow the procedure and the laws governing such withdrawal. It has not done so. This resolution consequently condemns the actions of Nicaragua. It is our position that failure to censure Nicaragua would set a precedent that would not be favorable to the OAS. It would mean that OAS offices in other countries would be vulnerable to such illegal action. Consequently, regardless of the causes of Nicaragua's falling out with the OAS, or whether or not one is sympathetic to Nicaragua in its disposition with the OAS, the legal path to denunciation of the OAS must be adhered to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, St. Lucia. Brazil, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, Brazil is one of the proponents of this resolution just recently approved with regard to the incursion that was carried out on the 24th of April into the offices of the OAS in Managua. This occupation led to yet another example of the flagrant disregard of this regime vis-à-vis anyone that is against it. We must here, and quite rightly, call out the flagrant violation of the basic foundations of the Charter of American States with regard to the 1949 Treaty on Privileges and Immunities and the basic precepts of international law as we know it. This is a direct attack on the inviolability of diplomatic property and customary law as enshrined in innumerable treaties. We call on the Nicaraguan government to respect these precepts and to return to a respect to the precepts of the OAS as on the 2nd of October of '89 these were signed. We understand that the agreement of the Secretary General of the organization would be necessary in order to take steps to adjust the situation. But we call on the Nicaraguan regime to take its own steps to restore the situation and restore the property of the OAS to that office, because it needs to understand that until the end of 2023, Nicaragua remains a member of the OAS. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. We reject what has been called here as an incursion, an invasion of the Nicaraguan authorities on April 24th of the offices of the OAS. And we know that there have been other instances in the hemisphere of an attack on the inviolability of these principles. Can only remember the assault and incursion into the Mexican authorities in November of 2019 and October of 2020 during the upheaval in Bolivia, which, by the way, was never picked up by the Permanent Council to even comment upon, even though at the time there were a number of persons whose lives were at risk and who had been severely persecuted. The inviolability of diplomatic property, including and principally the inviolability of the premises, goes also to the inviolability of the personnel. The Treaty of Vienna on Diplomatic Relations sets this forth as a basic principle of international law, and this was ratified in 2012 when, at the 27th meeting, the authorities of the OAS rejected any attempt to take this up on the part of the diplomatic missions and reiterated the obligation of all states of not turning to their own internal law to as a fig leaf to justify any kind of this incursion. And that is precisely what Mexico suffered in Bolivia back in 2019. And there was a deafening silence in this region at the time with respect to the Vienna Convention. Now here we see a very different treatment. And one can only wonder why. There is, alas, a political element here that does not serve the organization well, that undermines it. The principal inviolability of the diplomatic agents and indeed the diplomatic venues applies to everybody and is the bedrock of diplomatic relations. We get that. And because Mexico has recently suffered these principles, we voted in favor of the resolution. But, by the way, this does not mean that we give a pass to the Secretary General for this action or any others that may fail to be even-handed in regard to the inviolability of diplomatic personnel. There is no pick and choose here. There has to be an even-handed approach, no matter who's involved. The observance of the abiding by those principles cannot be aleatory. Now, we think certainly that there has to be discretion, but the subjection of international law on occasion to particular political interests of the ones or the others can only go against any attempt to find a peaceful solution to such measures as these, as well as the political and economic issues that arise in our member states. We, I say again, are very haunted and worried by what happened in 2019, and that is why Mexico feels that the General Assembly's adoption at the 25th session was a very good point. This was dealt with in the CAJP when we had the opportunity to ponder the questions of inviolability in April of 2021. There was indeed a session on the inviolability of diplomatic premises and diplomatic asylum. This has been a sacrosanct principle of diplomacy in Latin America and certainly held to be so by Mexico and numbers of others in the region. That very fine session, by the way, is being looked at by the experts who facilitated it and is an excellent point of reference. That's why, Chair, we have included a footnote to this resolution merely flagging the concern of Mexico that the present situation needs to be looked at per se and not in any way that undermines other considerations of a similar nature, which is what occurred with regard to the residents and the diplomatic premises of Mexico in Bolivia at the time, where serious violations were carried out between November of 2019 and October of 2020. With regard to the fourth preambular paragraph in a footnote there, Mexico is saying that not all of the member states have backed all such resolutions at the CAJP or at General Assemblies, as is suggested, and we call out again to all entities that belong to the OAS and call on the basic principles of law that undergird these principles, and understand that a respect for international law is a sine qua non for the respect for peace and prosperity in the region. I thank you. Thank you. We reiterate the position that we adopted on the 25th of April, Madam Chair. The absolute and unrestricted adherence to the principle of law that we are addressing here, the inviolability of diplomatic premises. Now, we have no doubt whatever that this organization is quite right to deal with some issues, and perhaps in other circumstances maybe not pay that much attention to them for whatever reason. And we wish, of course, to avoid anything that smacks of a double standard. And we have voted in favor of this because we understand that circumstances alter cases. Thank you. The General Secretariat understands that this resolution adopted by the Permanent Council with regard to the violation of our premises, and that this is runs directly counter to what Nicaragua itself had adhered to, as everyone has done so. Nicaragua is one country among others and is subject to the same obligations as anyone else, having signed the treaties. But let me remind you that the mere threat of incursion in the diplomatic premises of our offices there, we met in August of 2012, back then, to reaffirm in another circumstance, reaffirm these premises and rejected any means by which these offices might be violated, and reiterated that there is no way any country can avail itself of the fig leaf of particular circumstances to show them to be reasons for failing to abide by principles that had been previously established and accepted by them. This goes to customary law, it goes to conventional law, and the agreements on privileges and immunities, of which Nicaragua is a signatory. This same council on the 27th of April brought this forward, and everyone spoke against this failure to abide by commitments undertaken. These figures are known. The material that was seized is presently in a warehouse, and the Permanent Council has been kept abreast of all of this right down the line. This is why we appeal to a full respect for customary law and international treaties that are based on it. Never, even in the worst moments of our history, has any similar event been violated. And this, of course, it gives us a very clear understanding of the kind of daily violation of their human rights that Nicaraguan citizens are subject to. So we immediately called on the Permanent Council so that the matter could be addressed, and we are pleased it was done. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I think Uruguay was before me.
I think so. Uruguay, the floor is yours, sir.
Chair? I have the impression that the recurrence of this kind of matter is something that the 29 members of the Permanent Council understood was necessary, something that needed to be addressed today. This has to do with the principle of inviolability, international law, the inviolable nature of diplomatic premises, but I think there is a more important matter, which has to do with the tragic situation that the Nicaraguan people are suffering under this dictatorship, a dictatorship which is horrible, as Canada has characterized it. Yes, the diplomatic premises is important. We need to analyze this and reflect on it. However, in reality, what we must denounce repeatedly and undertake to change in some way is the criminal arrogance of the regime. I find no other words to characterize it. I was thinking about it during the session. We don't know how many people have died in Nicaragua. Not 10 or 50. We're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And it seems to me that sometimes entities like ours do have to repeat what's going on again and again. There may be a diversity of perspectives, but there are those of us who want democracy to be real and exist, and then those who may have a different perspective. I am happy that 29 countries agree that a regime like the Nicaraguan regime, which is a horrible dictatorship, needs to be criticized. We agreed on that, and that is the most important. That is the substantive issue. Everything else is fine, legal analysis and reflection, but what Nicaraguans are living through, how long can they stand this dictatorship? How long can they stand these violations of human rights and no justice? We know there are other countries that have dictatorships, dictatorial regimes that have lasted decades or years. This is an important discussion. Perhaps it's repetitive, but ask a Venezuelan if this is not a substantive issue, or a Cuban if this isn't a substantive issue. The defense of liberty, rights, human rights, the rule of law, the separation of powers. Ask them what they think. Let's see what they say, what they tell us. And what are they going to tell us? They're desperate. So when here we address this from a legal point of view, again, this is fine. This is a window on the situation, something that allows us to understand and come to a consensus. But there are nuances. Each delegation will understand what those nuances are, but I know where the rubber hits the road, and that is defending liberty and human rights and democracy. And this is a fight for good, for dignity, for moral respect. I'm sure we realize that this dictatorship is arrogant in its evil. I don't know if people are paying attention to us in Nicaragua, but I believe that many Nicaraguans are desperate for an understanding, a solution, and that the fact that the regime can go into a diplomatic premises and do whatever it wants, that's what it's showing us. And as an organization, we cannot ignore an act of that magnitude. But I think that we need to make contributions. We need to be involved. I think there have been many opportunities to create an environment where a solution could have come out of it. But unfortunately, that has not led to anything. I've been closely following everyone who intervened, and I think that they've made substantive contributions. And yes, we need to find a path where at the end of that rainbow we find democracy, but it's difficult. We are not talking with people who understand what dialogue is, people who use other codes and who violate the most sacred values of a society, which is the right to life. In Nicaragua, there is no respect for life. And let's be clear on that. The right to life is the most important value a society can have. And if we do not defend that, I don't know why we are here. So the appeal of the Permanent Council is a clamor for life in Nicaragua, for all Nicaraguans, for all of them. Thank you, Chair.
Antigua and Barbuda, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I start by thanking all of the delegations, 28 plus Antigua and Barbuda, that supported this very important resolution. Madam Chair, the authority of this organization was at stake. And what we did today was to show that we will not tolerate an affront to the organization and to our member states. The delegation of El Salvador indicated that his government could not support this resolution because other violations have taken place in the past. And he suggested that they were ignored and that there is or has been a double standard in this organization. Well, Madam Chair, this violation was brought to the attention of the member states at this Permanent Council. And this Permanent Council acted rightly to condemn that violation. If other violations had occurred and they were not brought to the Permanent Council for the Permanent Council's determination, then that blame, if blame is to be accorded, must be to those delegations that thought the violation had occurred, but did not seek to bring it here for it to be deliberated upon and for a decision to be made. But I agree with the distinguished ambassador of El Salvador that there should be no double standards in this organization. And that is why we must always stand up for the principles that are set out in the two charters that govern our operations. And all of us must make our voices heard when any violations of this kind occur. But not to pay attention to the violation that is now so egregiously, obviously, and evidently before us. Because if we were to ignore that, we would not only weaken the authority of this organization, we would weaken ourselves. A violation of customary law and international law occurred when police representing and on the instructions of the government of Nicaragua entered the OAS premises forcibly and confiscated its documents, all of which were immune. We acted today collectively to say we will not tolerate such behavior. Not in the past, not now, and not in the future. We have sent the right signal, and I thank all and every delegation that participated in this vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Ron. There being no further request for the floor, we have concluded the order of business for this special meeting. Today's comments will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. I thank all of you for your participation. This meeting is adjourned.